One night stole every dream I'd ever had. A house we built together was handed over to someone else. But do you know what happened after that night? It turned everything upside down in ways you won't believe until the very end. The keys weighed like stones in my palm as I stood before the home we'd envisioned as our forever. Or at least what was supposed to be ours. David and I had poured 3 years into crafting it, picking out every element from the rustic wooden beams overhead to the sprawling porch where we'd pictured ourselves aging side by side. Now it was Amber's, his 23-year-old fling, handed over for less than the cost of a cheap latte. I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 35, and I never imagined I'd be rebuilding my life from scratch. Yet there I was, watching my husband of 12 years stuff his belongings into bags, his face lit with the smug grin of a man convinced he'd come out on top. "You can't just do this," I said, my voice holding steady despite the storm inside. "We created this place together, David." He didn't even look up from his packing. "Correction, I created it. My name's on every document. You were too caught up in your legal world to bother with what you called trivial stuff, remember?" He wasn't wrong there. I'd trusted him fully to manage the building process while I carved out my path as a real estate lawyer. The bitter irony of it stung deep. "So you handed it to her for a single dollar?" I asked, studying his face closely. His smirk stretched wider. "It's a perfectly lawful deal, Becca. You of all people should know. $1 counts as valid payment for a property sale. The deed's filed. You're powerless now." My mind flicked to the paper I'd unearthed just hours before, hidden in a pile of construction records. David wasn't as slick as he thought, and he definitely wasn't as thorough. "You're right," I said quietly. "The deed's filed. Every last page of it." Something in my calm tone made him hesitate. He glanced up, his arrogance flickering. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I replied, heading for the door. "I hope you and Amber enjoy it. Just maybe check the details before you settle in." "What details?" he shouted after me, but I was already gone, leaving him to stew in his own confusion. I drove straight to my office, my thoughts spinning back to the moment everything shifted. It was 2 weeks earlier, late at night in my law firm. A coworker had paused at my door, looking uneasy. "Rebecca," she'd said, faltering, "you need to see this." She slid a property transfer across my desk. The title to our dream home, signed over to Amber Collins for a measly $1, dated 3 days prior. I stared at it, the ground vanishing beneath me. But that shock soon hardened into resolve. I was a real estate attorney. If David thought he could outplay me in my own arena, he was in for a brutal wake-up call. For the next 48 hours, I sifted through every scrap of paperwork tied to that house. David had insisted on handling it all, claiming it'd be simpler with just his name on everything since he oversaw the project. I'd agreed, blind with trust. What I uncovered in those files flipped the game entirely. Tucked in the deed was a clause, one he'd either overlooked or ignored. It was standard for custom homes around here. If the property sold below market value within 5 years, it sparked an automatic county review. But this wasn't just a checkup. The rule demanded a reassessment at full market price, with the gap between that and the sale price slapped with an immediate tax bill, payable by the seller. Our home was valued at $2.8 million. He'd sold it for $1. The tax hit would be crushing, and it'd land squarely on him. Better yet, that clause was locked into the deed restrictions, tied to the property itself. Undoing it required my signature to lift the limit, and I wasn't about to offer that. I smiled, recalling the flicker of doubt on David's face when I'd hinted at the fine print. He'd piece it together soon. Probably when the county assessor's office rang him about the looming tax demand. My phone buzzed, a text from him. "What did you do?" I ignored it, flipping instead to another find. A bank statement showing cash siphoned from our shared account into one under his name alone. He'd been quietly shifting funds, plotting his escape. But he'd slipped up. Every cent spent building that house came from our joint money, tying it to our marital assets. In this state, that gave me a legal claim to half its worth, no matter whose name was on the title. Another text, "Answer me, Rebecca." What fine print. I set my phone down and pulled up the county assessor's site. Right on time, there it was, a notice of review triggered by the sale. David would get the official word any second. My phone rang, his name flashing, but I let it roll to voicemail. Let him squirm. I spent the afternoon drafting papers. A claim for splitting our marital property, an urgent request to block any more transfers, and a breakdown of every dollar funneled into that house. By the time I left, I had 7 missed calls and a flood of panicked texts from him, the last one reading, "You knew about this. You set me up." Of course I knew. I was a pro at property law and tax rules. Did he really think I'd let him steamroll me? I headed to our apartment. One I'd refused to sell even after the house was done, despite David's nagging. Some instinct had kept me rooted there, and now I saw why. As I parked, I spotted his car in the visitor's lane. He was pacing by the entrance, his earlier cockiness replaced by raw nerves. "Do you realize what you've done?" he barked as I approached. "The tax bill. It's more than I earn in half a decade." I punched in the entry code, brushing past him. "That's rough. You've got to help me undo this," he pleaded, trailing me inside. "Release the restriction, Becca. I'll lose it all." I turned, meeting his frantic gaze. The man I'd loved for over a decade who'd stabbed me in the back. "You lost it all the second you gave our home to your girlfriend," I said coolly. "The tax mess? That's just the fallout of your own moves." "I'll fight it," he snapped. "I'll say I didn't know about the clause." I laughed outright. "Go for it. You signed the deed, David. You're a businessman. No one's buying that you didn't read it. Tell a judge you dumped a $2.8 million house for $1 without checking the terms. See how that flies." His face paled as the truth hit him. "What do you want?" he asked. "I don't want anything from you," I said, stepping into my apartment. "You chose this. Now deal with it." He yelled through the door. "What about Amber? She can't pay the property taxes either." "Then she'll have to sell," I called back. "Hope she gets more than $1." I shut him out, leaning against the wood as my pulse raced. Phase 1 was rolling, he just tasted the tax trap. But he had no clue what was next. The following day he'd be hit with my asset division claim. The day after, an injunction would freeze any more property games. By week's end he'd see his money-hiding scheme blow up in his face. My phone buzzed again. "David, we can fix this." I messed up. "Please." I silenced it and poured a glass of wine. He was right about the mess-up part, several actually. His biggest blunder? Underestimating me. I sat at my desk, flipping through the evidence I'd gathered. Bank records, construction receipts, transfers from our joint funds. It painted a tale of betrayal, sure, but also of sloppiness. David had been so wrapped up in Amber that he'd botched the details. And details, as any lawyer knows, are the whole game. Next morning I was at my office early. 3 envelopes waited. Legal papers for David ready to be served. My phone showed 5 more missed calls and desperate texts. The assessor called. "Tax bill's $980,000. Help me please. Amber's losing it. She can't cover the property taxes. Name your price." I ignored them, checking the county records instead. Amber's deed was locked in. She'd owe the ongoing taxes, while David ate the transfer penalty. Perfect. My assistant poked her head in. "Your 9 a.m. is here." Marcus Chin, the forensic accountant I'd hired, strode in with a fat folder. "You were spot on," he said, cutting to the chase. "The money trail's blatant. He didn't just use joint funds for the house. He's been shifting assets for months." He laid out the proof. Statements, transfers, hidden accounts. David had been scheming longer than I'd guessed. "Good news," Marcus added, "he's awful at hiding it. Every move's traceable. He funneled it all through your joint account, thinking it'd muddy the waters. It just makes our case airtight." I gave a tight smile. "How much total?" "Over $3.2 million, not counting the house." The number punched me hard. Years of shared effort, and he'd planned to snatch it all. My phone buzzed. "David again. Bank's freezing my accounts." "What did you do?" What I'd done was file for an emergency asset freeze with my divorce papers, backed by his shady moves. The judge had greenlit it fast. "Timing's on our side," Marcus said, packing up. "Most of this happened after he started with Amber. We can push premeditated fraud." I thanked him and saw him out. Back at my desk, an email from the county popped up. The review was done, tax bill finalized today. Then my phone rang. Amber this time, voice trembling. "Miss Mitchell, we need to talk about the house." "You mean your house?" I kept it neutral. "The one you got for $1? "I didn't know about the tax thing," she rushed out. "David never told me." I can't pay the property taxes and the bank won't lend me anything because you've got no stake in it, I finished. You paid $1. Please, she begged, cracking. David's accounts are locked. I don't have that cash. I leaned back, picturing her, young, caught in his mess. Sell it, I said. It's your best shot. Taxes are due in 30 days. Sell now, pay them off and keep what's left. Won't David be pissed? I nearly chuckled. David's anger isn't your burden anymore, Amber. He used you as a piece in his plan and it backfired. Get out while you can. She went quiet, then murmured, he said you'd try to take it back. That's why he put it in my name. I don't want it, I said. I want what's fair. You're just stuck in the chaos he created. Sell it, pay up and move on. After she hung up, I sat there marveling at how fast his house of cards was crumbling. Over the next few days the legal wheels spun. David hired a top-tier lawyer, but the paper trail was undeniable. Every sneaky transfer, every concealed account, all exposed. The tax bill landed at $980,000 due now. His attorney tried claiming the deed clause was unfair, but the judge shut it down. It was routine here and David had signed off willingly. A week in, Amber called again. I'm selling it. Got a buyer at market value. Just thought you should know. Smart move, I said. David's livid, she added. Says I'm stabbing him in the back after all he's done for me. Her laugh was hollow. Like dumping me in this mess was a favor. Sympathy flickered in me. You don't owe him a thing, Amber. He dragged you into this to hit me, not caring what it'd do to you. After the call, I checked Marcus's latest report. David's asset hiding was a goldmine for my divorce case, ensuring a fair split. 2 weeks later, the house sold for $2.9 million. Amber cleared the taxes and left with enough to restart elsewhere. Rumor was she went back to Oregon. David? The tax bill gutted his cash and the divorce was peeling back his financial lies. His once shiny reputation was toast. One night, reviewing settlement docs in my apartment, my phone lit up. David, you've ruined everything I worked for. I almost replied, reminding him we'd built it together, that he'd torched it himself. Instead, I looked out at the city glow. The dream house was someone else's now, a family with kids who'd love it. My life with David was history, but something tougher, truer was rising from it. Another text. Never thought you'd hit back like this. That was his fatal error. He'd seen me as the trusting wife, letting him run the show, forgetting I was a legal shark who'd outmaneuver him when it counted. The divorce settled fairly, half the assets as the law demanded. His tricks only bolstered my case, forcing full disclosure. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, a partner at my firm, city skyline sprawling before me. The sting of betrayal lingered, but it didn't own me anymore. My sister texted, saw David yesterday. Looked rough. You good? I grinned, thinking how far I'd come since that gut punch of a deed transfer. Better than good, I replied. I'm free. Free from betrayal's weight, from proving myself to anyone. David tried to strip me bare, but he'd only revealed my strength. The house was gone, but I stood tall. And that, I knew, was worth more than any title deed.